Baku brought a whole new world of pain to the Mercedes team, and I mean that quite literally. Their car was bouncing at levels unseen so far this season, which is pretty incredible considering 2 races ago the problem was apparently fixed. The team are begging the FIA to help them, but their pleas are falling on deaf ears. We all know about their porpoising issue, but they've found a new problem. Want to know what? Check out the video. In Baku, the silver arrows were bouncing more than they ever had before. I was just holding and biting down on my teeth due to the pain, and the adrenaline helped, Hamilton told Sky F1. I cannot express the pain that you experience, particularly on the straight here. At the end, you're just praying for it to end. For whatever reason, the team seemed determined to blame their poor car design on the FIA. They are demanding the governing body make changes to the car to protect the safety of the drivers. I can understand why they want to do this. Driver safety is absolutely paramount in the sport. It is actually why many rule changes happen in Formula 1. But the problem is that everyone knows Mercedes are able to make changes to stop that happening. They can raise their ride height and the car will stop bouncing. They're just choosing not to because it will cost them performance. This is Mercedes' problem, not an FIA problem. We read the comments on our last video about this and you all seem to be in agreement. It is Mercedes who are risking their drivers' health and lives, not the FIA. We all know that raising the ride height on the Mercedes will solve the problem, because we're constantly told it will. But what is the actual reason for it? And why is it specifically a solution for Mercedes? And what could they do to help lower their ride height for improved performance in the future? Something that Monaco revealed is that Mercedes aren't just suffering from porpoising. In Barcelona, they said they'd solved their porpoising, and the car did seem to be running much smoother than it had been before. But in Monaco, the bouncing was back, and that was kind of hard to understand. The race around the Mediterranean city's harbour is full of low-speed corners and short straights. In theory, it should be much harder to porpoise there, because the teams shouldn't have ever gotten to a speed where porpoising started to happen. George Russell was the fastest Mercedes through the speed trap in Monaco at a speed of 281.4 km an hour, which for an F1 car is pretty slow. So why did Mercedes appear to have some porpoising? Part of the problem with a lot of these street circuits is that the race surface is nowhere near as smooth or well finished as it is on a normal racing track. The surface is driven over by thousands of cars a day. It has potholes and burst pipes that need repairing, and there is the occasional manhole cover and grate as well. If a proper racetrack was as smooth as butter, then a street circuit is dry toast. Seriously rough. These bumps and irregularities cause problems for the teams. To make the most of the new ground effect floors, teams want to run their cars as close to the floor as possible. This is a problem for a couple of reasons. First of all, the amount of downforce created by the floor varies greatly depending on how far it is from the racetrack. From 10mm away from the ground compared to 5mm away from the ground, the underbody downforce probably doubles. From 5mm from the ground to touching it, the underbody downforce probably quadruples. Every little bump in the road will change the distance between the car's floor and the track surface, changing the amount of downforce being created and just generally messing with the underfloor airflow. This causes the cars to be more prone to porpoising. The problem that Monaco exposed in the Mercedes car is different though. In Monaco, they weren't really going fast enough to porpoise. Instead, they were bottoming out. These undulations in the floor, coupled with the very low ride height of the current cars, meant that the Mercedes was literally just hitting the floor as it went around the racetrack. On TV, it looks very similar, and it probably feels very similar to the drivers as well, but they are both caused by different things. Normally around Monaco, teams will raise their ride height to avoid this happening, but for whatever reason, Mercedes decided not to raise their ride height. They were probably trying to get their car as close to the simulated optimum setup as they could, but on a street circuit, that just isn't possible. After Monaco, you would have expected Mercedes to learn their lessons and realize that they couldn't run their car as low as they wanted to. But when Baku came around, it appeared that they had not. Perhaps that shouldn't actually be too surprising considering how little progress they've made in solving their bouncing this season. In Baku, the Mercedes cars were bouncing around everywhere. Baku has the same terrible track surface that Monaco does. All those bumps and irregularities around the circuit cause the car to bottom out. This has been true in previous cars as well, not just this year. Mercedes should have known this and should have raised their ride height accordingly. Instead though, they complained to the FIA that the regulations were putting their drivers at risk. The difference between Baku and Monaco is that Baku is a much faster track. It was Lewis Hamilton who went fastest in the Mercedes in Azerbaijan. He was clocked crossing the start-finish line at 334 kilometers an hour, over 50 kilometers an hour faster than Russell's speed through the speed trap in Monaco. This high speed means that the porpoising was back on the menu, and when you couple that with the bouncing that occurs on a street circuit, you're in for a bad day. So much so that Lewis Hamilton nearly lost control of his Mercedes multiple times. There were a lot of moments where I didn't know if I was going to make it, whether I was going to keep the car on the track, as on the high speed I nearly lost it several times. It wasn't just Mercedes who was suffering in Baku though, they were just suffering the worst. The cause of this can be found in the new regulations of cars. The ground effect floors mean that the floor of the car needs to be incredibly stiff and the suspension has to be stiff to keep the ride height consistent. These two things together mean that the cars can be very unforgiving in terms of ride comfort. When you have stiff suspension, the car is worse at absorbing all of the bumps in the track. Red Bull actually coped with the track surface in Baku the best of all the teams, and the reason for this can probably be found somewhere in their suspension setup. They're able to get their car really low to the ground without it being affected too much by the bumpiness of the track. What this is, I'm not sure, but if I ever meet Adrian Newey, I'll make sure to ask and tell you guys straight away. This combination of porpoising and an inability to absorb the bumps on the road is why Mercedes were bouncing so much in Baku, and why the drivers were so vocal about changes needing to be made. The bad news for the team is that Montreal is going to pose the same problem. The track surface in Canada will be very similar to Baku. It's a public park that's open for walking and driving around when the Grand Prix isn't there, and the track surface will be pretty poor compared to somewhere like Barcelona. So expect the Mercedes cars to be bouncing just as much this weekend. Unless Mercedes finally decides to think about their drivers' health and well-being, instead of their performance, and make some changes to the car. Well, luckily for Lewis and George, it seems like Mercedes have realized that no one is falling for their plan to get the rules changed. Mercedes Motorsport Strategy Director James Vowles spoke to the media in Canada about the health of the Mercedes drivers. Addressing a question about Hamilton's condition in Mercedes' post-race debrief video, Vowles said the bouncing experienced by both Hamilton and teammate George Russell was in part due to the setups run on both Mercedes, and that the pain they experienced was not acceptable. I'm pleased to report that Lewis is here this morning. I spent a few hours with him and he's okay. He'll be back in the car in Montreal, said Vowles. He is an elite athlete that will push the bounds of endurance of himself and the car, and that's what Formula 1 drivers do. That's what makes them exceptional. On this occasion though, we pushed the package and our drivers too far. We're putting them into significant discomfort and we simply can't do that again. Our drivers are not the only ones suffering. You'll see in the media a number of comments from a number of drivers who are equally in discomfort and pain. And we have a responsibility now to make sure that this doesn't carry on. I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say that I'm incredibly happy that Mercedes won't be risking the health and well-being of their drivers again in Montreal. What George and Lewis had to go through in Baku was outrageous, and questions need to be asked about why Mercedes were allowed to do that. How Mercedes addresses the problem in Montreal is the next question. The race is so soon after the Baku GP that they probably won't be able to bring any upgrades to the car in time. What this means is they'll probably have to raise their ride height, just like everyone has been telling them all along. This admission from James Vowles is great news for driver safety. No one wants to see drivers getting hurt. It's just such a shame that it has to come after George and Lewis have had to suffer through what they did in Azerbaijan. Hopefully now the sport can move forward from this, and lessons can be learnt, and drivers can be better protected from their own teams in the future. Want to know more about what's going on in F1? Then click the video showing on your screen and I'll see you there.